Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Healthy Muslim in Ramadan. We've been discussing different kinds of illnesses. Illnesses that we cause ourselves by neglect, by abusing this valuable body that we've been given one way or another. We've been looking at illnesses that come from the mind and come from the body, all of our own making. We've looked also at calamities that befall us, which are not of our own making. And we've looked at what it's like to carry the burden of a change in the nature of our mind, which changes fundamentally our character in a way that we acquired moral responsibilities for actions which are done during a time of mental change, which we can't recognize how we could possibly have done those things, and yet we are responsible. These are the different ways that it is to be human. So what happens if this happens to us? What should our response be when we become sick? I've already hinted I've had a sickness from which I've recovered, at least for the moment, inshallah. And because I was born Catholic and I've been on a spiritual path all my life, I did not respond in anger, fear, or with any sort of drama queen tactics. I was fascinated that Allah had sent me this illness in order for me to learn something. And this attitude to calamity is common to all religions, all paths. There is some beautiful, beautiful poetry. If you search widely in all religions, that gives you a glimpse of the powerful dimension of what this submission means. Equally, through what we've been discussing, I've led you to be thoughtful about how you look after your body. So you need to be your own physician when you know you have become sick. Your first thought should not, of course it has happened to you through Allah, but also you might have done something. Do not expect Allah to do everything to make you better. You're expected to do something yourself. And the doctor is also part of Allah's decree. And in your own analysis, be humble and look at, what have I done to my body, to my mind, to make this dis-ease happen? Sometimes things are sent to us, apparently, but we might actually have borne some responsibility. And the concept of this is psychosomatic disorder. In other words, that we are in some way responsibility for a lot that happens to you. I was talking about a man who was a cigarette smoker, who had advanced cancer and who was cured by a drug that I had suggested. The cure, of course, comes from Allah, nothing to do with my skill. And he failed to really appreciate the miracle that had happened to him. But the point was, he was a cigarette smoker and he carried on smoking. So not only did he not appreciate Allah's gift of cure, he continued to do the thing that caused the illness. In my view, that's a bit dumb. If you get a heart attack, the problem might be that you have a hereditary disorder of cholesterol metabolism, And however perfect your diet, at some point you would have a heart attack, because that is the genetic inheritance you've been given. Or it could be that you're a cigarette smoker, you're overweight, you're diabetic and you've abused your diabetes, you don't take the tablets and you've continued to eat what you feel you like rather than what you should eat. So you've made a contribution without valuing the precious gift that is the human body. I resented it when people suggested I had been responsible for my cancer, because if somebody comes straight up to you and says, well, of course you caused that yourself because you did this or you did that, and believe me, unthinking friends do this, but in the quiet stillness of the night, I'm glad they did, because we are responsible sometimes. And even though their judgment might seem a little harsh, it is important that we address that thought. But even if we're responsible, the moment that our illness happens is the decree of Allah. That is known from before time began and is intended for you so that you may learn something. In Quran, again in Surah Al-Baqarah, I say again, those who, when a disaster befalls them, say, surely we belong to God, and surely to Him we are bound to return. When we become sick, one of two things is going to happen. We'll be healed. We might be healed to return to our previous life, unimpaired. But what was the wisdom of the illness? Are we going to return to our life exactly as it was? Or was this not a reminder? Was this not a lesson that somehow we've got to live that life a little bit differently? What does it mean? Well, for one thing, you've been given a reminder that there's something called death. And do we not forget that? Yeah. Most of us go through the day really heedless. We don't think of death. We think of life. We think of enjoyment. We celebrate. We celebrate birth. We celebrate marriage. We celebrate birthdays. We celebrate promotions. We celebrate Facebook pages or LinkedIn. I can't believe it. People celebrate. I've been 5 years in the same job. Huh? Celebrate. Anyway, celebrate God's blessing. You've got a job. Many people haven't. That's good. But what do we celebrate? Today I thought of my death. Today I thought, what is the meaning of this, my life? And having been made sick, whether I caused it or not, how am I going to live my life differently since I have been given the means to go back to my life? Please be conscious of the value of your illness. Always, it's a flick of the whip of a loving God saying, come on, there's something you have to learn here. He doesn't spoon feed us. He expects us to do the work of how to find the wisdom in the faults in our own selves. But at least we must be in that journey. Then we must be thankful. When you're sick, you're reminded of the blessing of being well. It's glass half full and glass half empty. The man who had no shoes was miserable until he saw the man who had no feet. When I'm walking down the road and my knees hurt and my feet hurt, I thank Allah I can still walk. It's a blessing. You must allow anything that happens to you that feels like a pain to make you thankful for what you've still got. Remember Ababy Bakila, the greatest runner of the world. When he was quadriplegic, he said, well, Allah has taken from me the burden of running so I can look on his face directly. Profound. But maybe we will come into a life which is different, because something has been taken from us. That new life may seem like a loss, but it isn't. Let's think about that. Please come back after the break. Welcome back. In people with a spiritual life, it's very important when you're sick, whatever is going to be the outcome of the sickness, to be concentrating on what the message is. In Quran, those who, when a disaster befalls them, says, surely we belong to God, and surely to Him we are bound to return. This is Allah's will. Also in Quran, and it is He who gives me food and drink, and when I fall ill, heals me. If any healing is going to happen, that's in the hands of God. He will either enable the provision of the physicians or block it. There are some lovely prayers from the early traditions of Islam. I'll read 3 of them. There are many, many, many others. And we'll be discussing dua a little bit later, but it gives you a flavour of what the spiritual understanding is, and what therefore our attitude while we are sick should be. One, it says, you who are unhappy in your sickness, do not be anxious. Persevere. Sabr. Your illness is not a loss, but a gain. A sort of cure for something else. Life departs like capital. If it yields no fruits, no interests, it's wasted. If it passes in ease and heedlessness, it is short and it brings no profit. Illness makes your capital yield huge profit. So consider another prayer to somebody a bit more troubled and a bit more unhappy. You who are ill and lacking in perseverance, do indeed persevere and offer thanks. Don't complain. 1 minute in illness is equivalent to an hour's worship. And this illness has made you aware of your dependence on Allah. If it does nothing else, this is the beauty of an illness. Everybody who's sick, oh God, I want to be healed. Oh God. They may never say, they never pray any other time, but they suddenly want Allah in their life. Another one, also to somebody a bit unhappy. You who are impatient with your illness, know that suffering gives you real purpose and understanding of your maqam as a human. Suffering is more valuable than pleasure. In hunger, you discover the all-providing. In illness, you discover healing. You are no longer alone and heedless in pleasure. I love the paradox of this, because when you're at a party and you're bopping away, you think you're in company. Actually, you're alone, because you're not connected to Allah. You've forgotten Him for now. You're involved in your human activities heedlessly. When you're sick and miserable and alone and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got a fever and a headache and nobody cares about you, Allah is there. He is closer than your jugular vein. And that powerful presence in your suffering is real. Another aspect of illness, which is comforting, is that diseases and illnesses are considered as a tribulation which expiates sin. There's a lovely, lovely Englishman called Gay Eaton, who was a diplomat converted to Islam and wrote several books. And he was what I would call a quintessential Englishman, perfect in his manners, elegant in his behaviour, and exquisite in his use of words. And given his patrician bearing, he complained with grace, and he called to a man he regarded as a saint, a very holy man, and called on him and asked him to visit. The saint didn't turn up. He was a bit upset. And after he'd recovered, he met his friend again and said, "A bit upset with you. I called on you when I was ill and you didn't come to me." The saint shrugged his shoulders and he said, "I felt jealous of you, that you had such a blessing, and I didn't want to take any of the blessing away from you by somehow claiming credit for it." So that sort of explains when I was sick, I expected my Muslim friends to turn up. None of them did. I was left alone because they understood that Allah was going to be with me in a far more powerful way than they could. Actually, that was not the adab of the Prophet, and I'll be talking about that later. But I do think it was rather charming of the saint to know that his friend was going to be fine and that the protection of Allah was much greater than any kindness that he could offer. Because of this, people who we call Stoics, people who do not complain through their illness and pain and endure in dignity, they're given a great reward, both in this world and on the Day of Judgment. Bukhari says, "Never a believer is stricken with discomfort, hardship, illness, grief, or even anxiety, but that his sins are expiated." There's a difference between the Catholic tradition and the Muslim tradition, which is subtle. In Catholicism, not unreasonably, the illness is thought to be a consequence of sin. And so you pray for forgiveness because Allah has given you this burden of illness because of your sin, because you have deviated from the path which had been shown to you. In Islam, sin is a given. Allah shows you His mercy, but in your illness is a learning and an automatic expiation for the fact that you have been heedless, which may or may not be relevant to the illness. The heedlessness may have contributed to the illness because you allowed yourself to get fat, because you've neglected your blood pressure medicine, because you've allowed yourself to get angry and therefore you've got an ulcer, because you haven't been exercising so you fell over. The laundry list goes on about how we can make ourselves sick. And we are responsible, so we should say we're sorry. But there are other ways where illness is sent to us, and is sent to us as a blessing. And yet, in that blessing, part of the blessing is not merely to forgive our sins, to forgive the ways in which we've been heedless, but it's as if the point of sin is that it clouds our vision. It clouds our vision of who Allah is. What is the real meaning of our life? What is the clarity of purpose of every moment? What is the meaning of each individual action? That becomes clouded. We're more interested in catching the bath and getting the new bargain that's in the sales. We're not thinking of Allah anymore. The illness makes us stop, makes us pause, reconnects us. But we can't be reconnected with this mess, the mud of accumulated sin which clouds our vision. Because if you fail to do something properly for long enough, you get into the habit of doing it badly. And removing that habit is removing the habit of sin, removing the memory of sin, is what forgiveness is all about. Forgiveness isn't just, oh, I forgive you. It's also, you're not going to go back there. Allah is going to change you so you won't return to that path. So illness is a blessing. My prayer to Allah was appropriate. Huh, you sent me cancer. Thanks. Teach me the lesson. What was the lesson? That's private. But I was fascinated. I wanted to know. I wanted to see more clearly. This was clearly meant for my benefit. I trust in Allah. I know He wouldn't send me anything for my harm. Overall, He would only want good for me because He loves His creatures. Remember that when you're alone in the middle of the night with a headache, with a fever. Allah is close to you. And He wants you to know that. Assalamu alaikum. Please join us again.